Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Stan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we'll be continuing our Dragonlance podcast. We're going to be continuing with Book 2 of Dragons of Autumn Twilight. The first chapter is basically it's the attack on souls. The second chapter sees the heroes arriving in the Inn of the Last Home again, which I actually like that. This is Book 1 did, so I really like that. This is a very clever setup that Weiss and Hickman did. So we're supposed to compare the arrivals. The companions end up settling down for lunch, with Caramon essentially shoveling as many potatoes as possible down his throat. And there are some elves who also arrive in Solus, and they are targeted by some of the Draconians and goblins, with the companions essentially almost ending up in a fight. And Tika, of course, bashes one of the enemies with a frying pan. The companions are made to surrender because it's either that or a heated fight. Toad, the hobgoblin, shows up, the Viewmaster. He says, take their weapons and their packs, with Tanis trying to avoid more trouble, deciding to surrender because he's applying the logic of Qui-Gon Jinn. Essentially, we'll wait for the opportune moment later. Right now, it doesn't do us too much harm to surrender. They want us alive, very clearly. Goldmoon, of course, decides to risk the lives of her companions by bringing attention to the discs she's carrying, with River when stepping in front of Goldmoon and threatening the enemy. Now, this is where Sturm isn't very bright and does much the same. And Raceland ends up pretty much intervening, realizing that Toad is about to basically massacre everyone in the inn, and decides, okay, you know what? No, Tanis is right. We're surrendering. There's no to unnecessarily risk other lives when the enemy does not know what's in the pack. And you're bringing attention to it is only going to make them curious about it. Raceland and Tanis are actually thinking with their brains here. She accuses Raceland of being a traitor. She then ends up saying, this is our hope, loudly. Of course, Toad, notices the scuffle over the pack, and Raceland is made to think quickly and salvage her mess up, and ignoring her accusation of traitor, which, not gonna lie, this one's getting a little annoying with how Flint and Goldmoon and Riverwind keep accusing him of this when he's carrying the darn team, him, Sturm, and Tanis. So funny how she doesn't accuse Tanis of being a traitor when he was the first one to surrender. So technically Tanis and Raceland are traitors in her eyes, at least in the heat of the moment. Weirdly, this is actually one of the weird moments for her, because normally she's more composed than this, but here we kind of see what she truly thinks of Raceland. Raceland, of course, decides to use some pyrotechnics and say the great worm Caterpillius, basically caterpillar, will rise from the abyss and drain what's inside their veins until they are nothing more than a dried husk. And of course Task gets excited by this. The goblins all believe this weird lie, with Caramon foolishly asking, how effective is it, referring to the spell? It's about as effective as your wit, Raceland whispered. Yeah, and then Raceland has to basically dangle in his face the telltale black marks of flash powder of his hand in Caramon's face. Normally, I don't like to call him really slow, but he's really slow here. In this chapter, essentially Tanis and Raceland had to save the team. And of course, the elf from the inn is revealed to be Gilthanas, and we find out that the blacksmith of the village, Flint's mercantile competitor, the Eros, is wounded, with Gilthanas initially suspicious of Tanis. Of course, Goldmoon saves Theros to the shock of Gilthanas, who had no idea she was a true cleric. That said, we are also introduced to the great and mighty guard, one of the mightiest in all of Krynn, known as Sestun the Gully Dwarf. I actually hate that Sestun was not made into a permanent companion. He should have totally been one of the heroes of the Lance. And I'm entirely serious. I wish this character was there throughout the entire series. It would have added a good comedic element there. Can you imagine him and Tass bouncing off each other?
And then you bring in Flint in the equation.
Yeah, I actually think it should have been a trio there, not a duo. I like Sestun, and then you could build up Sestun with his own novel trilogy after this. I know I'm a fanboy of Sestun the Gully Dwarf, and I shouldn't be, but I love him as a character. I seriously love him as a character. Oh man, he's such a great character. The companions are in caravans, or cage-like ones, traversed through the land, just near Qualinesti, with Sestun eyeing up some of the bad meat that was tossed, and even grabbing some and eating some of the rotten meat the companions rejected, because it's not good for you. And of course, they devour the bread, though. Accompanying the companions at this point is Tika, whom we're supposed to be fond of. Tika, though, her backstory is revealed, with her father having been Wayland the Illusionist, And with an 8-year-old Raistlin having been able to imitate his every trick flawlessly after just observing it once, it says here on page 291 that Tika had always admired Raistlin, and she had been impressed by the stories she heard about his mysterious journey.
You serious?
She was never impressed by him. I know that it might sound like I'm contradicting right here, but one has to bear in mind, by Dragons of Winter Night, she totally hates Raistlin. So the only reason she tends to Raistlin is to earn the approval of Caramon. Now, Raistlin is in really bad physical condition because he does not have his tea and his cough is getting worse and aggravating a fever, one of his many fevers. Now, I'm not trying to judge Tika too harshly, but it's one of those cases where she's deep down repulsed by Raistlin. She's one of those ladies who, being repulsed by Raistlin, decides, I'm going to help him just to get the approval of Caramon. Raistlin has been subjected to this since his youth. His first love, he did this to him. And Raistlin really hates this. And honestly, I'm with him. Essentially, you kind of want compassion from even one person, but you're just simply hated and falsely tolerated just to earn the approval of Mr. Good-looking Brad Pitt over there. You're going to be kind of left thinking, buzz off. To the lady. So she's not actually doing this out of the goodness of her heart. It's out of desire for Caramon. I'm sorry to all the Tika fanboys and fangirls. I don't hate Tika, but here you have to bear in mind she's telling herself she's doing it because she admires Raistlin. But then she admits at the end of the paragraph, but actually I'm doing it because I want to get the approval of Caramon. So everything that came before that does not count. Tanis, we get him reminiscing about Gilthanas, Laurana, and his friendship, which apparently was a very close-knit bond growing up, with Gilthanas apparently having been closer in terms of sibling relationships to Tanis rather than Porthios. But then again, Porthios is
not that bright.
Their bond is such that when Tanis went to leave Qualinesti to go live in Solus, Gilthanas and him exchanged bitter words because Gilthanas deep down did not want Tanis to leave. Exchanged bitter words over Laurana because Gilthanas is protective of her and felt that you're leaving without her, this is going to hurt her. What are your intentions for my sister? With Tanis kind of not really having answered him. That is a bit of a cad move. So that Tanis was essentially leading Laurana on without really committing to her, which I know that some like Dragonlance Saga see this as, I don't understand why Gilthanas was disapproving of Tanis getting along in that way with Laurana. But you gotta look at it from Gilthanas' point of view. Him and Tanis were very close, but then Tanis starts to treat Laurana like this. Gilthanas is going to feel a little bitter and angry because he loves Tanis, but the way Tanis is treating Laurana, leading her on like a puppy, it's not okay. So he called him out on it. And this is why he disapproves of Tanis and Laurana, at least initially. Gilthanas is not actually that much of a jerk to Tanis, though Dragonlance Saga and others have claimed he is, but this, I don't know where the claim comes from. He's essentially one of the characters carrying the team after this. He's a great companion. Him and Tanis, I actually really like their relationship and their bond.
Yes.
Gilthanas spends most of the journey worrying over Theros and keeping to himself because he's a fairly private individual. He's also noted for being a serious scholar and basically being the brainy one in his family and having dabbled a little in magic, in marked contrast to Porthios. Towards the end of chapter 3 of book 2, Fizban appears. Fizban ends up pretty much pretending to be a befuddled senile old man. He does a good job acting this way, and I've seen people say he's not entirely Paladin, he's just an extension of his will, like an independent avatar. No, he is Paladin. It's just Paladin who has entered the mortal realm. He has all the knowledge, all the power for the most part of Paladin. It's just incarnated himself into Fizban. Yes, he's not at full power like he would be in his own realm of light as a great dragon, which is his real shape, or as the great warrior kind of archetype. That said, it's Fizban who goes to Raistlin's side as the other companions are getting a little uncertain, and Tanis says maybe we could ask the Viewmaster to give us some of Raistlin's tea, which is a really, really foolish suggestion, but Tanis knows it's foolish. It's just he's trying to reassure Caramon and calm him down because Tanis is at a loss here. Fizban goes to Raistlin's side and proceeds to threaten Feastan Dantalus, telling him, not the time, because it's really Feastan Dantalus draining the life force from Raistlin. Feastan Dantalus, getting terrified of Paladin looming over him, menacingly goes, okay, I'm withdrawing.
Better not upset him.
Feastan Dantalus' soul has interwoven itself with that of Raistlin's at the moment. So Paladin really wouldn't risk it, but Feastan Dantalus doesn't know this and is just a coward by his very nature. He kind of retreats. That said, Raceland, with his golden eyes, looks upon Fizban and sees not the old man withering away that the other companions see, what's kind of behind the old man. So that I actually think he totally knows who he is, to an extent. Or at least he suspects. And he kind of goes, "You are... Magi." And while Raceland passes out, he is a little apprehensive and anxious over this old man. The companions, over the course of the journey, take pity on Sestun, having learnt a bit of a lesson in some cases from Raceland's relationship with the other gully dwarves, it seems, as revealed in the next chapter on page 297. Part of the reason they do take pity on him is that Toad and the other hobgoblins and goblins, they really don't like the poor gully dwarf. Even the elk that belongs to the Viewmaster kicks Sestun at one point. Tass is really the worst part of this journey, as he gets bored and proceeds to annoy even Goldmoon into nearly slapping him, so that Tannis sends him to the back of the cart. It's humorous, but it's very true how the cruelest form of torture one can inflict on a Kender is to lock him up. Of course, it is also widely believed that the cruelest form of torture one can inflict on any other species is to lock them up with a Kender, especially a bored one. Apparently, Flint's of the opinion that any of them would have exchanged the Kender for a few peaceful hours of being stretched on the rack. I can understand Flint there.
Yeah, because get why Taz is so frustrated?
Because he's bored. He's a Kender, but on the other hand, he's torturing his companions. I like to quote how Raceland suffered in body, Sturm suffered in mind. Sestun apparently lived near Pax Tharkis and was enslaved, made to pound rocks and mine, until he got a job in the kitchens. And then he ended up accidentally spilling some really hot soup on Verminard, who was wearing his armor, so that Verminard had to sleep on his back for a week.
Deservedly.
Terrified, Sestun decided to go volunteer to serve with the Viewmaster, rather than perish at Verminard's hands. And so this life of humiliation and degradation he thought was preferable to losing his life. Tannis momentarily forgetting and asking, "How many Draconians does Lord Verminard have guarding the mines?" 2, Sestun said, holding up 10 grubby fingers. Tannis asked a question before he actually thought about who he was asking the question to, so I'm not going to judge Tannis here, because it's not that Tannis is foolish. It's just your average guy would just go, "Okay, how many are there? Oh, right, I forgot who I'm talking to."
Which 2 could mean anything between 0 and 100.
Or 1,000,000. And then he ends up telling them, not more than 2. Ironically, he's actually telling the truth there. But none of them believe him because they just think he's a gully dwarf, and it could mean anything from 2 to 200 to 2,000,000 to 2,000,000,000. Term. Tannis and Caramon end up recounting stories about Huma, trying to figure out if there's something to be discovered from them so that they could fight dragons. Raceland mocks them. What is Raceland mocking them for?
At least Sturm and Caramon are trying to put a war plan together.
Raceland's someone who loves to exchange stories about various mages throughout history. Why is he mocking the warriors for basically going, "Okay, how did Huma slay so many dragons?" Now, Caramon, though, does say something foolish. Story, that's all it is. Raceland points out, "We know the dragons are real," and Fizban comments, "Huma was real, and so was the Dragonlance." Of course, this task forms a bit of a relationship with Sestun, which is funny. You have Sestun who corrects him on his story. "But first, Demon, thank you," prompted Sestun, who had heard this story with variations twice before. "You forgot, did I?" "Well, yes, the demon thanked me and took away the magic ring he'd given me. If it wasn't dark, you could see the outline the ring burnt on my finger. Sun upping, morning soon, I see then," the gully dwarf said eagerly. I just like that Sestun likes Tass's stories. Like I said, I would have loved to see these two have a bromance.
The gully dwarf and a Kender.
Porthios to the rescue, but because he's Porthios, he kind of screws up and almost accidentally downs Sturm with an arrow on page 302.
Some of the companions make comments about it. They strike at Fizban's hat. You have Tika's blouse stuck to one of the bars.
They were handpicked by Porthios, so you just know they suck at their job. Porthios only brought 20 men to save his own brother. I don't know, it's not like this is a prince of the realm of Qualinesti. Porthios doesn't seem to have prioritized the rescue of his brother. We have Fizban, who comes to the rescue with a fireball at the wrong time. This is one of the most humorous scenes, because Raceland just kind of goes, "Oh my gosh, fireball!" But before that, Sestun was, of course, trying to rescue the companions, because he's a great ally and friend. Helped them out by smashing at the lock. The fireball misses the lock, which is pretty funny and purposeful, and the floor is on fire. So basically, Fizban fumbled up the fireball spell. But he did roast quite a few of the Draconians, which shows his concern was not with getting them out of the cage. It was with taking care of the few remaining guards safely, because if they burst out of the cell without any weapons, the Draconians would massacre them. I know the companions wouldn't find much comfort in this. He is looking out for them because he knows, or at least suspects, what's going to come up, having a bit of fun here when he shouldn't. That said, once free, Gilthanas flees for the forest. I'm surprised Porthios doesn't have the archers shoot down Gilthanas purposely. It's the sort of thing Porthios would actually do.
It's probably because he always misses the targets that he wants to hit.
Probably. That said, chaos ensues. Tass worries for Sestoon. Goldmoon ends up complaining about Porthios, basically saying, all right, run along in the forest. Nothing we can do to help you. Which, actually, I'm with Porthios there. Weirdly, I can't believe I'm saying that. Because he's just acknowledging we can't really help you. It's not exactly our place. Go back to Solus. We're not going to attack you. Goldmoon complains that this is cold-hearted on the part of the elves when it's practical. You can't take care of everyone. Porthios, of course, never one to miss a shot at showing how imbecilic he is, complains about how humans brought down the cataclysm, as though that has anything to do with this situation, with Goldmoon telling him the gods are among us. Porthios goes to get enraged and show how unchivalrous he is because, why respect a lady? Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Goldmoon, but I do think if I were to meet her, at least show a bit of common courtesy because it's called being a gentleman. Gilthanas intervenes and saves his brother from making a bigger fool of himself, because that's always Gilthanas' role. Gilthanas and Tanis always have this job when it comes to Porthios.
Babysitting.
And I do feel bad for Tanis, and this is probably part of the reason why he left. Well, that and Solosterin. Solosterin and Porthios, babysitting them was a full-time job, so I can kind of understand Tanis. Gilthanas tells Porthios about how Goldmoon saved Theros, who's a friend of Qualinesti. So can you please not do something dumb? The companions getting a bird's eye view now of Tanis's family life. Of course, funny enough, the most sympathetic towards Tanis is Sturm, who comments, coming home isn't easy, my friend. Raceland demonstrates a great deal of patience towards Fizban, meanwhile, which is unusual, and the companions take note of this. Gilthanas ends up complaining that why do you flaunt your human heritage? I would think you would be ashamed, given that Tanis' father violated his mother, and thus was Tanis born. Gilthanas informs them that they're leaving Qualinesti, with the elves in mourning over this. They have very little reason to leave. They could withdraw inwards and try guerrilla tactics and whatnot, like Gilthanas has been doing for some time, but Solosterin and Porthios would rather uproot the entire nation and abandon it and anyone who stays behind, which is probably a good chunk of the nation, and flee to save themselves and go enslave some Kagonesi elves. They never came across a bad decision they didn't want to make. And if I sound overly critical towards them, it's because I do despise them. And yes, I can understand some of the reasons for fleeing, but on the other hand, you have nowhere left to run. The enemy can throw out a dragon or two. The fact that Verminard has not done so yet is a sign that he's slothful by nature. You might be able to employ this strategically to your advantage, but they're not thinking in terms of strategy. They're thinking in terms of flight, because Solosterin is a coward at his core. It's why he withdrew into Qualinesti after the Cataclysm. Apparently Gilthanas has slipped over to Pax Tharkis to observe Verminard, has tried to attack Pax Tharkis unsuccessfully. Gilthanas, I mean. The speaker decides to extend them some courtesy, if only because Goldmoon's a cleric. Of course, Laurana shows up, charms the companions, later embraces Tanis when he slips off. Tanis rejects her, telling her that he likes Kit now, because, he's thinking with other Tanthalos. That said, she refuses to understand Tanis because she's lovesick. To be honest, when I read the term in this book at this point, it was the first time I really have. And I do think it's an apt description for Laurana. When Tanis wakes up at the end of the chapter, now he doesn't realize Tass was spying on him, or that Tass slipped off with the ring he once gave Laurana. Gilthanas is looming over Tanis when Tanis wakes up in the morning, tells him that Laurana's alright, and that her handmaidens brought her home, and that she ended up spilling to Gilthanas everything that Tanis had told her. Tanis had finally made a decision on which one he wanted, Kitiara or Laurana. Here, Gilthanas admits that after Tanis left that first time and came back, he always came to believe that Tanis' human side called out for other humans. It's implied he felt that there maybe should be some sympathy for that, rather than refusing to see it or condemning it. And he tried to tell his sister and tell her, I don't want you to get hurt here, but you gotta stop pining after Tanis. Elf maidens and Dragonlance, once they're in love with someone, they will not give up, and they will pine away for thousands of years if need be. And I'm serious, this happens a few times, and it's very unhealthy on the part of some elves. Gilthanas ends up thanking Tanthalos, tells him, I know it cannot have been easy. Now Tanis stumbles for words. I love her, I really do. It's just that, please say no more. Let us leave it as it is, and perhaps if we cannot be friends, we can at least respect each other, so that it is clear that Gilthanas wants to rebuild the friendship.
He is much more willing to try and understand humans for for example.
Well, he's got a bromance with Theros, Ironfeld. He genuinely tries to look at things from Tanis' point of view. And we have to bear in mind, in the upcoming chapters, him and Tanis often band together when people like Eben, Sturm, and Caramon are constantly haranguing Gilthanas, turning their ire away from Raceland for a brief time and against Gilthanas. I'm not saying Gilthanas is a innocent maiden. No, just that tackles his duties with dignity and regality. At this point, he's basically saying, we've both done too much for us to ever be friends again. I hope we can at least respect each other, which he has stated just now. He wants to rebuild the friendship. After he comforted Laurana after the breakup, he goes to comfort Tanis after the breakup. Just pretty much expressing the attitude, I know I was the guy who did not approve of you leading my sister on while seeing another woman, but the fact that you now broke it off with my sister, and here's the thing, Tanis did lead Laurana on for years. I'm not blaming Tanis here. And yet, most brothers, if that had happened to our sister, how would you have reacted to the guy who was leading her on for years? You'd probably be a little mad. What do you think of Gilthanas saying, it's okay, bro, let me comfort you after the breakup? This is a guy who treated his sister like garbage, and finally got the cojones to properly break up with her. And yet, he has the goodness of heart to comfort the man. That takes maturity, far more than I myself probably have.
Gilthanas going out of his way to try and understand what half-elves deal with.
I kind of think that maybe they should have had Gilthanas' father a half-elf at some point. As I know it's a weird thought, but it's something that, like, it would be fitting for Gilthanas to kind of go through that arc so that we could see that he's different from Porthios and Solosterin. And that where his father rejected Tanis for being a half-elf, Gilthanas, how would he treat his own son or daughter who would be a half-elf? He would embrace the child. And this could further cement his bond with Tanis. And you could have like a novel where the two have to rescue the half-elf child and bromance it out. How would you have reacted to a follow-up novel where it's just Gilthanas and Tanis going on an odyssey to rescue Gilthanas' kid?
That would be a very, very good story arc that would allow us to explore both characters.
And we could have Tanis be put in the position of being wiser than Gilthanas. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to tell us what you think of Gilthanas, of Sestun, the events that happened, and smash that like button as well as that subscribe button as though you were Sky trying to tear apart the High Claire's Tower and Sturm to itty-bitty pieces.